Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live video. This is going to be about the season premiere of Game of Thrones. This is the final season. This is season 8. And I originally wanted to kind of talk about my general thoughts about each and every episode since there's only going to be 6 this season. It's not going to be, a full 20 episode long kind of networked show type thing. So I figured it would be much easier for me to do all of these. And my plan is to perhaps have some guests come on, some of my friends, and just have us talk about the episode, whichever it is. But this is the season premiere, and it is titled Winterfell. Something I had just found out because they haven't been releasing all of the episode titles before the season has come out. I guess due to any type of spoilers being released or anything like that. And I think that's kind of a good thing because we don't want any spoilers for this season. At least I know I don't. Maybe some people will even watch the series even if they were spoiled about what is going to happen. But this is the first episode, and it is only about 54 or 55 minutes long. It is not the full hour. It is not feature length like I think many people thought it was going to be. And that is kind of unfortunate, but it's not something that is going to break or dismantle the show for me in any way because, I've been invested in it for so long. But it is titled Winterfell, and kind of appropriately so, since I think the most interesting aspects of this episode is everything that happens at Winterfell. We are basically picking up pretty much where last season ended off. Maybe there is a little bit of a time jump, a little bit of a time gap, because as we remember from the end of last season, basically everyone, or at least the good guys, Jon Snow, Daenerys Targaryen, they decided that they were going to band together to fight the main threat of the White Walkers and the undead army that is coming from beyond the wall. As we saw with the last season ending, they knocked down the wall and they are here and they are ready to kick some ass, essentially. And initially, Cersei Lannister said, "Yeah, I will team up with you," and all that kind of stuff. But of course, Cersei has her own agenda, and Cersei's not going to help out the good guys or anybody else because she automatically sees them as a threat. So what we get here is the arrival of Daenerys and Jon Snow at Winterfell, and he is greeted by kind of this almost like parade of people coming in. There's kind of an honor guard on the side. Of course, everybody's there. Sansa and the other sister are there, and it's really just a kind of reunion of characters, which is a big part of this episode. The biggest part of this episode is kind of people being reunited that hadn't been reunited last season at any point. And I thought that that was really interesting because I had kind of forgotten that these characters hadn't seen each other in so long, because I didn't do a whole rewatch leading up to this season. I pretty much haven't seen season 7 since it aired about 2 years ago, unfortunately. So I'm kind of in a bit of a, catching up in my mind about all the things that we left off with. So in this episode, we got the reunion of Jon Snow and his other sister, who for some reason's name is completely failing me right now, and I don't know why. Arya, yes, Arya. I don't know why I'm just completely blanking on names right now. He and Arya have a nice meet in, I believe, the old Godswood, and they haven't seen each other since season 1. That is a significant amount of time to be apart, and so much has happened with these characters. And they really don't have a very long reunion or very long discussion about all of the things they've been up to because they would have been talking for a very long time. But they pretty much just have this acknowledgement between the two that they've been through some stuff. John has literally died and come back to life. Arya has become this badass assassin who has killed, several people. So she is, she's no stranger to violence and things like that. Very much the complete opposite of Sansa from the early part of the series, and it's really interesting the dynamic now between the Stark children, or in this case, the Stark family, because as we learned in the end of last season, is that Jon Snow, not only is he still part of the Stark family, but he is also still part of not only is he part of the Stark family, but he is not their kind of half brother anymore. He is essentially their cousin, which is a very interesting familial dynamic. We have to keep in mind all of these familial relationships and how people are all interconnected. The show hasn't done a great job of explaining all those things to us, so we kind of have to do a lot of that legwork ourselves. But yes, Jon Snow, we know, is the son of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen, and he finds that out in this episode, which is probably one of the biggest reveals and the biggest moments of this episode. And it's very interesting how that comes towards the end of the episode, because leading up to that moment, we get a lot of interesting interactions between a lot of people at Winterfell. We get a really interesting scene between the Onion Knight in Davos, in Varys, and in Tyrion, where they are kind of discussing the future and the present as well of things that are going on. We know that the Northerners are very skeptical of trusting anyone who is not a Northerner. That is why they've rallied behind Robb Stark and Eddard Stark, and of course they've rallied behind now Jon Snow, because they really value the loyalty of themselves. They really value the people who are from their own area. And Daenerys is technically from Westeros. She's technically from the south, but she grew up in Essos. She's never really been to the Seven Kingdoms. She's Westeros. She's not really well known around there. She's kind of being here for the first time. Granted, she was here as a child, but she was on Dragonstone, and she was whisked away when she was just a baby, I believe. So this is really kind of her first introduction to Westeros, the northern part of Westeros. And they are discussing that perhaps they would make a very worthwhile, happy married couple to unite all of Westeros into one, specifically getting the North on their side. And that would be a very interesting prospect if it had not be for the fact that Jon Snow and Daenerys are related. And and that is something that we need to keep in mind, because there is another rather romantic scene between the two that comes right after really an amazing moment. I think a moment a lot of people had been wanting to see, and that is Jon Snow riding a dragon, or someone other than Daenerys riding a dragon, and someone who has a connection to the Targaryens riding a dragon other than Daenerys, is something that is really important and really something that people were looking forward to. I know I was. I got really excited watching that scene, because it's overall a really good scene in of itself, because they acknowledge that there really is no real way to learn to ride a dragon. You just kind of do it, and if you fail, you die, and if you don't, you live. That's pretty much Daenerys' instructions to Jon when he gets on top of one of her dragons. And it's a great sequence of them flying and chasing each other, and the dragons are chasing each other. It's really fantastic. The CGI I thought was really good. You can kind of notice it is CGI. They're probably writing some type of animatronic thing with a green screen in the background. You can kind of notice it, but still you give yourself over to this world of fantasy and things like that. And then right after that, they have this really romantic scene together, which it's nice, but it's really creepy and really awkward, considering us knowing what we know. And I'm really curious if John's going to rethink this whole Daenerys situation now that he knows what his true lineage is. And it's interesting that they didn't waste any time in divulging that. They didn't waste any time in, kind of leading it along, kind of having it ruminate in the background for several episodes. And then there's a big reveal in perhaps the final episode, or maybe the second to final episode, or something like that. That's typically how a big secret is revealed in many of these shows. They really drag it out, and I'm glad they really did it because we only have 6 episodes. There is another reunion in the form of Arya and the Hound, who we haven't seen for quite a few seasons. The last time Arya and the Hound were with each other, Arya pretty much left him for dead, and somehow, some way, he survived his wounds and he is still alive. That was a nice little moment because I thought they had some of the best chemistry and one of the most fun and interesting storylines throughout the entire series was them basically having this buddy road movie that was within the show that was really funny and also really heartfelt as well at times. And it's really interesting how they both ended up at the same place. Arya also gets to reunite with Gendry, who she hasn't seen in many seasons. She hasn't seen in many seasons, and as we know, Gendry is the last remaining Baratheon, if you will, at least in this series. In the books, is completely different. The books and the show are two completely different things, and you kind of have to keep them separate right now at this point. You know, they've just diverged so far apart that you can't really talk about one and talk about the other in the same breath. But in this world of the show, Gendry is essentially the last living Baratheon. All everyone else has died, and it's very interesting if that's going to play a part at some point in the series, in these final episodes, because he is technically has a stake in the throne, but not really if you think about it. If it's supposed to be at this point pretty much up for grabs about who has it, and at least the world believes that Cersei Lannister is the rightful queen of Westeros now because, everyone else is gone, so it's pretty much her turn. And that brings me to Cersei, who has, of course, her own plans and her own things, which involve Euron Greyjoy and his Iron Fleet that are pretty much just hanging out off the coast of King's Landing, just waiting there to do whatever she wants, essentially. And I'm really curious about what her grand plan is because she got news of what is happening up north, that the wall has fallen and that the White Walker army is now making their way south. And she had a really evil smirk on her face while she did it and while she heard this news. And it really interesting to me. I'm like, what is her kind of grand plan? Because I understand that she wants the White Walkers to kill all of her adversaries, therefore she doesn't have to worry about them or do any of the work to get them out of her way. But they're not going to stop with the North. They're going to keep going south to the point where they reached the King's Landing. So is her plan to get on those ships from the Iron Fleet and go someplace else? If so, where? She also has enlisted the services of the Golden Company, which is essentially this mercenary army that you can hire from Essos, and if you pay them enough, they'll basically fight your war for you. That's kind of a lot of the way a lot of things happen in Essos, where you pretty much get hired for different things. There's a lot of mercenary things happening in Essos, and they are here now. And what we learned is they are about 20,000 people deep. They have 2,000 horses, no elephants, unfortunately. To Cersei's dismay, they have no elephants. But Euron Greyjoy decides he wants his payment now, essentially, which is essentially his chance to sleep with Cersei, who, of course, has always had this reputation the throughout the world, or at least throughout Westeros, as being the most beautiful woman and all that kind of stuff. So probably a fixture of many people's sexual fantasies and things like that. So that is what he wants, and he doesn't really have any loyalty at all. Excuse me. So I'm really interested in seeing where that goes and what her plan is. We also get a scene with Bronn in a brothel, I believe, or maybe in the place where he lives. It's always great to see Bronn. He is one of probably the best underused characters in all of the series, and I really wish they would give him more to do. So essentially, he is caught in a compromising position with three other women by Qyburn, who is now the hand of the queen, and he basically says that the queen wants you to kill both of her brothers if in fact they don't die in this war, which is a very interesting, the contingency plan that she has. And what she's going to reward him with is, I assume, what he has always wanted, and that is a castle. He has always wanted a castle, so I'm guessing that's what he's going to get. And what we other another reunion we get going back up to the north is a reunion between Sam and John, who have not seen each other yet again for quite a few seasons. And as we remember, Sam went off to the Citadel to learn the things that he could learn there, to become a maester, and he has left there now with, of course, that this new knowledge of the lineage of Jon Snow that is pretty much confirmed and bolstered by the visions that Bran has now as a three-eyed raven, and they have pretty much come to the point where they're going to tell Jon about his true lineage, which is a scene I mentioned earlier. But that scene is precluded by a scene between Daenerys, Jorah, and Samwell, where basically Sam finds out that both his father and his brother were executed by Daenerys because they refused to bend the knee and pay allegiance to her, and he becomes emotionally distraught because of it. I'm thinking more so because the loss of his brother than I think his father. His father was a pretty terrible guy to him. His father pretty much shipped him off to Castle Black with by with no choice on Sam's part. Sam had absolutely no choice because his father looked down upon him so much that he didn't want him to take over when his father, died, to take over the House of Tarly. He wanted his younger brother to do so. So Sam is kind of distraught because of this news, and he goes to John and pretty much tells him, did you know this? Did you know this? Did you agree with what she did? And pretty much John says yes, because John at this point, I think, is willing to do anything he possibly can to defeat the White Walkers. He has now faced them twice, as he mentioned to Sansa earlier in this episode, and he is pretty much willing to do whatever it takes because they are an unstoppable force. Pretty much, they can be stopped with dragon glass, but there is literally so many of them that you don't know if there's enough dragon glass to go around to make enough weapons. Which is another part of this episode. We got to see Gendry making dragon glass weapons and them gathering all the dragon glass they possibly can find in the north and make those weapons because they're gonna need a lot of them. But John pretty much agrees with the fact that Daenerys had to execute Sam's father and brother because he understands that everyone needs to be united, and she is probably the best chance at them winning, and she's the best chance at also becoming queen, and probably the best person to become queen, at least in his opinion. He pretty much says that to Sansa in an earlier scene. There is a lot of friction between Sansa and Jon Snow in this episode, and it's very interesting how they differ on things, where Sansa is very aware of being untrustworthy of other people, especially queens or people who proclaim themselves to be queens or royalty or people who hold themselves in a high regard, because she has literally been tortured by people in those positions before, whether it be emotionally or physically, and she understands that you really can't trust anyone fully in this world because at any point they can screw you over. And that's a very interesting feeling that she has, I think, that is buried deep within her. And she pretty much tells John that she asks him, did you bend the knee because it was the best thing for the North, or did you bend it because you're in love with her? And John is indeed in love with her, as we've seen at the end of last season and in this episode. But now I'm very curious where that relationship is going to go. It's a really, really good setup episode. It's a really good episode, I think, to get all of our foundations, and it's an emotional episode, I think, for a lot of longtime fans who have been wanting to see a lot of these characters reunite for a very long time. Unfortunately, this could probably only lead to bad things coming up. that is one thing I've seen when it comes to movies or television shows or things like that, where when there's good things happening, bad things are going to happen are right around the corner. So with this war that's upcoming, we could see some character deaths, some emotional character deaths that we don't want to see. Excu- excuse me, that we are unaware of or that we are unprepared for. That's what I meant. And it's really going to be very interesting going forward because I believe the episode the episode run times are only going to increase. Like I said, this episode was only about 54, 55 minutes long, kind of a regular runtime. I believe next week is 58 minutes, and then they're going to go, upward from there to the point where I think the last two or three episodes are an hour and 20 minutes long. So we get that hour and a half time slot. How much of that is actually going to be filled up with footage? We are going to see because you never know how they cut different things or how they cut promos for the upcoming episodes or the promos before this episode start. HBO likes to play a lot of those games when it comes to editing all of their marketing in the front and back end of all of their episodes. So I thought overall this was a really good episode. It's a setup episode, it's a foundational episode, it's a continuation from last season, kind of tying up a lot of those loose ends, plus opening up some more. And I really can't wait to see where the series goes further and how the series is going to wrap up because as of right now, there's only 5 episodes left. And there's a lot to be done. And we also got a nice stinger kind of towards the end of this episode that I really like. But we got kind of two. We saw uh Tormund Giantsbane and his band of people who are at the wall. They are now, retreating from the wall. We got to see Dolores Ed and the people from Castle Black kind of meeting up and kind of discovering that and realizing that the White Walker army is between them and Winterfell, but they now need to retreat to Castle Black. So they need to somehow tell the people at Winterfell that the White Walkers are coming. We also got a nice stinger at the end of this episode where Jaime showed up to Winterfell to tell them that yes, Cersei screwed him over. She's not sending the Lannister army. She's not sending anybody to help out. She's doing her own thing. But as soon as he gets off a horse, the first thing he sees is Bran sitting in his wheelchair as the three-eyed raven, just looking at him. And they have this kind of staring competition back and forth. And Jaime must be thinking in his head, "Oh man, I kind of thought you were dead. I haven't seen you in a long time." I don't think they've seen each other since the end of the first episode of season 1 way back when. So there is a lot of catching up that they must have to do. Also, I really liked Bran in this episode, how he's just sitting around and waiting. He has a nice scene with Jon Snow. They reunite. He has a nice scene with Sam Tarly. They have another reunion from seeing each other from way back when. And at one point, he remarks in this episode that he's waiting for an old friend, and that old friend, I think, is Jaime Lannister. So yeah, I really enjoyed the heck out of this episode. Can't wait to see what's coming up. So please stick around for these other reviews. Like I said, hopefully I'll be able to get someone else on so I can have a nice little back and forth conversation instead of just me talking into a microphone, talking directly at you, because that could get kind of boring after a while. So if you like this video, please go ahead and check out the other videos on my channel as well.